Imagine sitting down on a sofa with a counselor to discuss your mental health and any daily problems you might be facing, such as trouble with the in-laws. How does this experience make you feel? Now, imagine instead sitting down at a table with watercolors. And as you again discuss your mental health and the in-laws with your counselor, you also begin to paint so that the conversation about, a lack of control over your family members sort of blends with the general imprecision of the watercolors. And you're calmly guided to consider, how does your choice of a red color mix with and affect any surrounding colors that it touches? Sort of like how your actions may affect the situation with your in-laws. How does this experience make you feel? Is this creativity and counseling something that might be right for you? Hello there, this is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by PsyChi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychological science to a diverse range of current events and to better your life. This episode is made possible through a special PsyChi sponsorship with CSPP Alliant International University. If you'd like to learn about graduate programs at CSPP, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for this episode. Would you prefer to read along as you listen? A written transcription is available for this episode. Just see the link in the show notes. There are so many creative counseling methods, from dance therapy to even sand tray therapy. For this episode, let's define creative counseling, and let's discuss benefits and ethical considerations for implementing creativity in counseling. We'll also sort of hone in on 5 methods in particular as examples. And last but not least, let's share strategies for pursuing a career that uses creative counseling to help others. Our guest speaker for this episode is Dr. Kat Vincent, an assistant professor at, you guessed it, CSPP Alliant International University. Dr. Vincent is a counselor, educator, and she's going to educate us today, I'm sure, as well as a licensed clinical counselor in Florida and Mississippi. Her specialties are in supervision, wellness, and creativity in counseling. And speaking of creativity in counseling, one of her scholarly interests actually involves writing children's lit that incorporates counseling research. Dr. Vincent, welcome to Psych Everywhere.
Thank you so much, Bradley, for having me.
So we hadn't really done a counseling type episode on the show, I don't think, and I thought, what a fun place to start, but a creative one. But before we begin, we would like to start out and dedicate this episode to Dr. Thelma Duffy, who is the founder of the Association for Creativity and Counseling, who recently passed away. Dr. Vincent, are there any words you'd like to share about her at this time?
Dr. Thelma Duffy was just such an outstanding leader and visionary for how we could really connect as an expressive arts therapy community under this one umbrella. So she founded the Association for Creativity and Counseling and their peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Creativity and Mental Health, and started a wonderful conference that meets every year. She was a wonderful leader, mentor, and friend for me.
Thank you. So listeners may be aware that we haven't released an episode in a while, and I just wanted to explain that that's because I had taken a little time off lately because my wife recently had our second son. But I am excited to get started again today, so I guess I'm ready to jump right on into the questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. So my first one, like I indicated earlier, is could you share a preferred definition for creative therapy?
Sure. So I have a few.
Okay.
The first thing I wanted to do was just really to touch on creativity itself. So Rollo May, in his writing, The Courage to Create, said, creativity is the process of bringing something into being. Out of the creative act is born symbols and myths. It's bringing to our awareness what was previously hidden and points to a new life. So I wanted to share that because the first thing I typically hear whenever I talk about creativity in counseling or creative therapy is that people say, well, I'm not creative. And I want to point out that creativity is at a continuum. So we're all creative, and creativity is something that we can cultivate or practice. Now, for a definition around creative therapies, I like Dr. Deggs White's definition, saying that the expressive arts have the power to help us transcend the mundane and to connect with parts of ourselves that traditional talk therapy may not so readily offer. The arts provide us with a medium through which we may draw on inner feelings and the unconscious to produce a tangible product, whether that's a sculpture, a story, a painting, or a dance. But I think that an even more simple definition comes from McKay, who is a drama therapy researcher. Acts of artistic expression in and of themselves carry their own healing. I really liked these three different ways of looking at creative therapies that that we can essentially expand upon this traditional talk therapy that so many folks practice in the U.S. and in other countries.
So, what is the significance of including creativity in therapy? In what ways has it been shown to support wellness?
Sure. So I think one of the greatest things about creativity in therapy is that we're offering folks a way to be very active in their experience. And these experiences are multi-layered and multi-sensory often. It offers the opportunity for a deeper self-exploration, connection with the therapist, self-expression, and pathways for healing. I'd also like to say that I think that creativity in therapy has been there for a long time. It's been infused into a lot of the theories and interventions. I think about Fritz Perls, who would often have clients exaggerate what they were doing. You know, they shake their hands, and Fritz would say, "Do that bigger," right? Virginia Satir would do family sculpting. One member of the family would essentially put other members into sculpted positions such that people could see these alternative perspectives and really embody what that felt like for the other family member. But if we take a step outside of this Eurocentric lens of the talking cure, so to speak, we can look to other cultures, historically and present day, such as First Nation people, indigenous, African, Asian cultures, and how there's been a long, rich history of using music, chanting, drumming, painting of bodies, using plants, herbs, creating mask, dancing, storytelling, yoga, all of these art forms to promote healing. So if anything, using creativity in therapy, it's a return to these healing practices, and it's more inclusive to diverse needs. In that same vein, I would like to say that creativity is also developmentally and diagnostically inclusive. So for children, for example, we might have unintentional cultural disrespect to them if we're primarily using oral communication as a means for their treatment. As we all know, they don't develop oral communication so readily, and so using these creative counseling techniques is very respectful for them. Another example that came up for me was around older adults with neurocognitive disorders. There's been loads of research about the positive effect of music in therapy for them. So, which leads me into talking about how it supports wellness, in an overarching sense. Certainly, there's a lot of improved communication, increased integration, insight, perhaps a new sense of the self. But I wanted to dig deeply into maybe one example of how one creative type of therapy can support wellness, and that is around yoga. Yoga's been around for the last 5,000 years. Some historians say potentially up to 10,000 years. So in northern India is where a lot of the theory came for yoga practices. And now here in the West, we are more active in trying to research the specific benefits for various populations. A key figure in this would be Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's been studying trauma-sensitive yoga. To cite one research study of his, in 2014, he shared about his research with women who had chronic PTSD. These participants had not historically responded to traditional psychotherapy treatment. Essentially, after going through a program for trauma-sensitive yoga, they found that their symptoms significantly decreased, and these findings, they were sustained over time, whereas with the control group, the participants reverted back to their baseline scores after a round of traditional psychotherapy and psychoeducation.
Could you tell us why you decided to switch educational paths? I know you started out as an art student and then you became a licensed clinical counselor.
Sure. So I will share, Bradley, I had a very strong identity as an artist. I exhibited nationally whenever I was a teenager. So when I was in college, I very much, was all about exploring my art. And I perhaps dabbled in psychology, like other people maybe dabbled in art. They took a ceramics class in college or something. But I loved it. And I can even recall going to a Chi Sigma Iota induction ceremony for my roommate and just thinking like, wow, this is so incredible. And I didn't necessarily see myself as potentially being a psychology major and going down that route. I, however, still had that insatiable curiosity and a strong value of service that I think kept pulling me towards psychology. Truth be told, some of my professors were the ones that kind of scooped me up and were like, "What are you doing? What's going on here?" And it really helped me to bridge how I could potentially, bring my art into psychology. And I will share that it's been a process throughout my education. Even after getting my doctorate, I still wondered, like, how exactly, do I fit in this strong creativity and also my love of psychology and counseling. And that's where I found organizations. I explored a lot and really landed in creativity and counseling. I do want to share for students that might be listening, and maybe you find yourself in a similar sort of position that you're interested in psychology, but really unsure like how it fits for you. I just want to say that there is a place for you. Like if you're recreation science and interested in psychology, adventure-based counseling is wonderful, or ecotherapy. An accountant and psychology major, I assure you, there are so many organizations that would love to have you, participate. So, check in with your advisors and, allow them to share things with you that maybe sometimes you can't yet see for yourself.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier that you don't have to be good at art to benefit from creative therapy. I wondered, what about the counselor? Should the counselor be good at art or creativity before integrating it into a session?
Great questions. So firstly, no, you absolutely don't have to be good at art. And I will say that there are various modalities that will be more suited for some clientele than others. I think as far as for clients, we need to make sure that we're individualizing and learning the ways that that particular person wants to express themselves or may be comfortable in challenging themselves. I personally do kind of like an informed consent around creativity and counseling to emphasize that this is about expressing oneself and not being an artist. Sometimes I'll even share that I'm a trained portrait artist, but I use stick figures whenever I'm doing art for therapy, just to help people feel more comfortable. A quote really resonated with me as I was thinking about this topic, and that is Picasso said that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. You also mentioned Dr. Thelma Duffy at the beginning of this, and she was one that taught me, or it taught many of us at a conference one time, that creativity and counseling was not just about the creative modalities, but that it was also about being resourceful in and of itself. That makes me think further, even just about having an integrated theoretical orientation. What is that if not being very creative? You have to have a sense of openness, curiosity, flexibility, intuition, exposure, and creativity to have an integrated theoretical orientation.
I wanted to make sure that we don't, or that I don't oversimplify. So I wanted to say, like, I know creative therapy is more than just doing an art project or a breathing exercise and then calling it a day. Could you share about some of the structured conversations that work alongside this? Like, what kind of things might be discussed during a session?
So yes, we need to be very careful and beware of being technically eclectic or just doing arts and crafts. So firstly, I want to say that there can be highly structured methods across the different modalities. So this is where I'll insert just a little bit of ethics into the conversation, which is to say, if you are looking to go more deeply into one of the particular types of therapies, we'll say dance, movement therapies, you would need to get further education, training, and supervised clinical practice to make sure that you are doing a lot of those structured conversations in the sessions. I was thinking about specifically dance and movement therapy as when you are doing a lot of those movements, things can begin to open up that have been previously closed or maybe closed for a long time. This is very powerful work. And so to be ethical and to have the best client care, we really need to have that additional education and supervision. But at the very least, if we're talking about using some interventions, we essentially need to connect with theory, to be very intentional in what we're doing, to be individualized with our clients, and to create a space for processing. Dr. Sam Gladding, who is also really well known in creativity and counseling, adapted the Scamper model to help clinicians increase creativity in client work. So just to give a very quick breakdown of what Scamper stands for, the S is for substitute, combine, adapt. He gave a few extra on the M. So we have modify, magnify, minify. P, it was to put to other uses. E, eliminate. R, reverse or rearrange. So this is a model of how we can increase creativity in any field, but Dr. Gladding really brought it to the counseling profession or therapy, and how can we use this with our clients to increase creativity. So to give an example of the use of modify, let's say a client brings a metaphor into the session. I'm just trying to keep my head above water, or I just feel like I'm swimming against the stream. It's a very common thing that many of us feel. And so how do we help the client to maybe modify that metaphor in that moment as a creative practice, moving through it?
You mentioned ethics. I imagine that any art created during a session has to be kept confidential, right?
Absolutely. That art piece or that product is held with the same level of confidentiality
Mhm.
as our case notes.
So I was hoping that you could provide a brief overview of 5 or so types of creative therapy and their unique benefits.
The first area that I wanted to touch on was the visual arts. I think that's often what comes to mind too when people think of creativity and counseling, is that you can bring in drawing, painting, sculpture, collage making, photography, sand tray, and then, like I mentioned, the social media or apps infusion. So um, there have been so many apps that have come out that can help clients track sleep, for example, or trying to help them stay on track of their goals. But whenever I talk about like a social media type of infusion, um, yeah, I'm thinking about ways that we can really connect with different populations. So, for example, um, you might be working with a teenager who is really into these short videos. Maybe they're TikToks or Reels or something like that. And so allowing that person to bring that into the session, whether it's something they've really connected with, maybe it's something they've created, but that it's something that they really want to process with you, or show something that's resonating more deeply with them, as a way to connect with that client and to process what's going on with them. Um, so all of my categories are around the arts, truly. The next area is expressive writing. So in this category, you might be composing, writing poetry, letter writing, bibliotherapy. If you're not familiar with bibliotherapy, that's the use of books in the therapy room. So the client might choose a book, or you might choose a book. It could be a children's book or um, a paragraph. I'm a big fan of the allegory of the cave, right? There are lots of different writings that you can bring into session. Another thing that I really like to use in therapy are metaphors. And just to define that a little bit, and I'm talking about is a figure of speech. So it's containing an implied comparison, expressing an idea in terms of something else, right? So metaphors can be created by the client or the clinician. So the client might say something like, "Oh, I'm drowning in my emotions," or the clinician might offer something like, "You know, I really see how you're torn in two by this." And when you're using metaphors, you'll often just try to stay in the metaphor and explore it in that space. Maybe you even bring a different creative means to come in and express it further, right? So you have this metaphor. All right, well, let's put the pen to the paper with it and use it in that space. Um, you you certainly want to process it afterwards, and you can even empower change within the metaphor itself. The third area that I wanted to touch on was music therapy. I think this one is also pretty well known. So, if you are using music in therapy, it can be the clients bringing it, you could be using it. There might be composing of music. And perhaps sometimes music is just going on in the background of something else that you're doing together. But there certainly has been lots and lots of research on how music makes such a strong impact on clients. The fourth category, um, I've kind of lumped together lots of different things
Mhm.
here that are all connected to body. So we have dance, movement, yoga, mind body work. So I've already mentioned trauma sensitive yoga. Somatic experiencing is growing dramatically in the US right now, of really being able to um, check in with the body as you're also checking in with the mind, to be able to have that mind body connection and growth. Um, and another thing that I really love with mind body work is progressive muscle relaxation. Um, Breath work is becoming increasingly popular. Um, I've mentioned dance and movement based therapies. You also have in this category guided imageries or meditations. I also kind of tucked ecotherapy into this category. Um, Lots of us at the California School of Professional Psychology in our Masters of Clinical Counseling program are very interested in incorporating the outdoors into the work that we do. So I put it into this category because I've enjoyed whenever I had clients that wanted to go for walks in confidential spaces, uh, or to incorporate plants or different things into the work that we're doing. The last category that I wanted to touch on was drama therapy. So um, this could be storytelling using improvisation, puppetry, role play. I did want to share a quote from Joseph Moreno, who is the founder of psychodrama. He wrote in his autobiography about this encounter that he had with Sigmund Freud. This is in 1912. So Freud stopped him to talk, and Moreno stated, "As the students filed out, he singled me out from the crowd and asked me what I was doing. I responded, 'Well, Dr. Freud, I start where you leave off. You meet people in the artificial setting of your office. I meet them on the street and in their homes and in their natural settings. You analyze their dreams. I give them the courage to dream again. You analyze and tear things apart. I let them act out their conflicting roles and help them put the parts back together again.'" This
Hmm.
very strongly worded
I like
interaction
that.
there. But going back to the other part of your question, I think is that these are all means of working towards coping and healing of our psychological and physiological pain. And so, I see it as when we are supporting these unique creative outlets with our clients, we're supporting healthy individual development.
For some of our audience who might be students or alumni with careers outside of counseling, or maybe they're not in counseling, if someone wanted to integrate forms of art or creativity or yoga into their daily routines outside of that licensed counselor setting, do you have any tips to help them do so in a way that's supportive of their wellness?
Absolutely. And this is also quite timely with the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that I would like to invite anyone to do is to check out growth mindset. Dr. Carol Dweck researched mindset, and I'll just share briefly that it's the idea that with practice that you can grow and develop, you can make change. So when embarking on any of these additions to your life, starting off with a growth mindset can be really helpful in integration. Just some basic tips. The first thing is to explore the best time of day for you as to when you have the appropriate amount of energy, attention, and availability to start your yoga practice, or maybe it's drawing or dancing. For me, I really did an assessment of myself. When is the best time for me to exercise, for example? And really found that, if I wake up before my family, I can achieve 30 minutes and do that. The second part of that is to schedule it then, to set yourself up for success on your calendar to make sure that it happens. And then the last suggestion that I would have is to have an accountability partner or situation. An example of an accountability situation would be to perhaps sign up for a yoga class at your university, for example, or to recruit a friend or family member who's going to go on this journey with you.
Could you share anything else on ethics issues that counselors should be aware of when utilizing creativity in counseling?
Yes. So I already touched on the importance of getting further education, training, and supervision. But I also wanted to add that it's important to join different organizations. So you could join one that's very broad, like the Association for Creativity in Counseling, or a little bit more narrowly, the American Art Therapy Association, for example, or even more specifically, like the National Association for Poetry Therapy. Explore what's available out there for you. It's important to join these organizations because you will have access to literature, research, and continuing education. But I think the most important thing for you at this point is to research what you need for licensure for the state or states that you're interested in. You want to make sure that if you're choosing to go on to graduate school for any of these types of specializations, that you'll be able to be licensed at the end of it if that's what you're deciding to do, being a practitioner.
I'm going to guess that there are some students listening right now who are becoming interested in learning more about pursuing a career in creative counseling. Could you share any strategies for doing that?
Absolutely. I would say a great start is to try out the type or modality for yourself. You can do this through going to individual counseling, for example. You can attend webinars or trainings that talk about this type of therapy for rather inexpensive rates. Another idea is to go to specific conferences or conference sessions that you can learn more about these specific types of creative counseling. So, for example, if you decide to go to the APA conference or the ACA conference, you want to check out and see what are some of the creative counseling sessions that are going to be offered for it. And the last idea that I have is to check out some of the expressive arts textbooks. Two of my favorites are Sam Gladding's text, where he breaks down the different types of creative therapies in each chapter. And then he further breaks it down into different populations according to age or type. Another great book would be Suzanne Deggs-White's text, where she organizes creative interventions according to theory. So each chapter will have a different theory, which will then have different modalities discussed within it.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere. This episode was made possible through a PsychI sponsorship with the Alliant International University California School of Professional Psychology. That's CSPP. Founded in 1969, CSPP was one of the nation's first independent schools of professional psychology. Today, CSPP continues its commitment to preparing the next generation of mental health professionals and advocates. Their dedication to ensuring every community's access to quality mental health care extends from integrated care to inclusive family therapy. Explore their programs at https://discover.alliant.edu/psychi, which is PSICHI/home. And I'll put, a link to that in the show notes as well. really appreciated Dr. Vincent for coming on the show today to discuss creative counseling strategies, and I hope you did as well. Would you like more free mental health related content from Psychi? So we've recently updated our publication search tool, which is an Eye on Psychi magazine, so that you can now easily review all of the recent articles that are listed under a new category of mental health. So go check that out in all of the other categories, such as career preparation and diversity. And that's at https://www.psychi.org/publications_search. If you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you go for podcasts. Tell a friend or a colleague about the show. Word of mouth is a huge help for podcasts. So share what you learned at your next counseling session or in your classes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Psychi Podcast and leave a review at Apple Podcast or wherever you go for podcasts. Trust me, you will absolutely make my day. And more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Okay, that's all for now. I will connect with you again soon. Copyright 2023, Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved. I think that's a wrap.